Hello friends, it's Lisa, and today I'm going to be chatting about the worst and most disappointing books that I have read this year. So I'm going to be talking about the DNFs, the books I didn't finish, the most disappointing books of the year, and then we're going to get into my worst books of the year. So progressively throughout the video, I'm probably going to get more and more angry. Not angry. I just didn't like some of these books, and that's okay. I hope we can keep it respectful in the comments. I understand that I may dislike a book that you really loved, and you may dislike a book that I really loved, and that's just how it works. I think at this point, we all understand that these videos are just like my personal opinions, and I'm not trying to attack anyone that does like these books. And one of these years, I will be able to do this type of video without giving a disclaimer first, but this is not the year. But yeah, let's just get into the video and discuss some of the books that I did not love this year. So first, like I said, we're going to be starting with the DNF section. Now, I am very bad at DNFing books. There probably were a lot of books this year that I should have DNF'd. Books on this list that I probably should have just DNF'd, but I'm not very good at it. I feel like I always have to see something through to the end, and that's not the case. I really don't have to do that to myself. But I did still have one DNF this year, and I still wanted to mention it, and that is A Merry Little Me Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. So this is like a holiday rom-com where we're following two characters, Bea and Nolan, and they both get cast to be in this like Hallmark-esque Christmas movie. Bea is in the adult film industry and kind of accidentally gets cast as the replacement for the main lead in this movie. And then we have Nolan, who is an ex-boy band member. He has this bad reputation and has recently just gotten into a scandal. So he's trying to get into this movie, or he's being a part of this movie to kind of help his reputation. I actually didn't get to this point, but I do know that throughout the book, the two of them kind of have this secret off-screen relationship that they're trying to hide from everyone, and there's a lot of secrets involved, and I didn't actually get that far. I think I got like 20-something% of the way through this book, and the reason I decided to put it down was I wasn't really meshing with the writing style. I also wasn't really connecting with the characters. I just wasn't super invested in the book as a whole, and the fact that this is a holiday romance, I was reading this recently, and we're approaching the end of the year. There's so many things that I want to read before the end of the year that was a big motivation for me DNFing it. Not only other holiday like rom-com types of books, but just like books in general that I want to get to before the end of the year that I didn't want to waste my time reading something that's like 400 pages and I just wasn't into it at all. So that was why I DNF'd this one. It's not a bad book, just wasn't really meshing with me. Now we can get into the disappointing section. So these are books that I anticipated being 4 or 5 stars and then maybe ended up being 2 and 3 star reads, and so they were very disappointing for me for one reason or the other. So the first book I want to mention that I found disappointing was When the Sky Fell in Splendor by Emily Henry. But this is following this group of friends who have this YouTube channel, and they actually go around their town trying to investigate different things going on, just trying to uncover some secrets of their town, and they end up seeing something falling from the sky one day, and they decide to go and investigate that, and then chaos ensues. So it does have to do kind of maybe perhaps with aliens, and that's kind of all I really want to say about it. I feel like that's all the description of the book really gives you. So this book definitely had an interesting concept. It was definitely intriguing with the whole like perhaps there's aliens thing going on, and also it's a very character-driven novel. There's this like group of friends, this like found family almost, which is something that I typically enjoy in books, but for some reason just didn't work for me. I didn't really care about the characters. I didn't get that invested, and so it made a very character-driven novel just not really work. I also did read this book like in the first half of the year. Anything that I read earlier on in the year, I may be a little bit fuzzy on the details, but I did read this for a specific vlog, my Stranger Things vlog. I read books that have been compared to the show. I will have any specific vlogs or anything where these books show up linked below in the description, but I read it for that video, and I remember at the time thinking that the pacing of this book was also very weird. It would be really, really slow, nothing would be really happening, and then there would be this action scene that would happen just very quickly, and I would almost get confused because it would start and finish so fast, and I just didn't feel like I was following along with what was actually going on, or I'd missed certain things because the actual action parts of this book were just over so fast, and then it would be back to being really, really slow. So the pacing just also didn't really work for me. I wonder how many times I'm going to say this book didn't work for me in this video. Don't make this a drinking game. But yeah, overall, just wasn't super invested in the characters, and it was a very character-driven novel, and the pacing was weird. Just overall, not super invested in this story. Okay, the next book I want to talk about, I'm a little nervous because I feel like a lot of people really love this book, and that is Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. So this is a romance book that came out, I think this year, maybe last year. I think it was this year. But you're following these characters. It's like a friends to lovers romance. We're following Percy and Sam, who meet at the lake one summer when Percy's parents and her buy this lake house. So I think they're like 12 or 13 when they buy this house, and she becomes friends with her next door neighbor, Sam. In this whole book, we're seeing flashbacks to when Percy and Sam were growing up every summer that they spent together at the lake houses. But then we're also following them in the current day timeline, where we find out that Sam and Percy haven't spoken or seen each other in like 10 or so years. I can't remember exactly what it is, until she ends up having to go back to the town to attend Sam's mom's funeral. So that's the first time that they're going to be seeing each other in like 10 years. So I did like the whole lake house setting. I liked the like childhood friends to lovers kind of vibe at the lake house, and the writing itself was fine. There were just a lot of things within the plot and also like the way the book was structured that I just did not like. So as I was saying, we do get like the flashback chapters to Percy and Sam in their childhood growing up every summer, and then we also get those moments in the current day. And I'd be interested to see the actual breakdown of how many chapters and how many pages are in the past versus the present, because I feel as though we spent a majority of this book in the flashback chapters, which made reading this adult romance very strange because I was reading about teenagers almost the whole time. It felt like a YA novel, and then we would jump ahead to the like present day chapters, and then these very adult things would be happening, and I'm like, this is just a big tone shift. It just, I don't know, the tone was just weird with those flashback chapters and the current day, and I feel like there should have been more in the current day and less in the past, I mean. And for some reason, there was just this disconnect between the characters when they were younger versus adults. For some reason, I just wasn't invested in the characters and didn't really care about what was going on in the present day. And I was more so like invested in what was going on in the like flashback chapters. It was just very strange, the use of the past and present day characters and chapters and everything. It made the overall tone of the book very strange, but also I felt not super connected with the characters when we would flash forward. It also has one of my like least favorite things to read about in romance. I feel like it could maybe be considered a trope. I don't know. It just has something that I kind of just don't enjoy reading about, especially in romance. And also, I don't know, I don't want to say it's like a criticism because I don't know if this part was supposed to be predictable or not, but like the reason why Sam and Percy, I'm not going to say what it is, but the reason why that they aren't friends anymore and why they spent like 10 years not speaking to each other is so obvious so early on in the book. I don't know if that's supposed to be a plot twist. I don't know if that's supposed to be surprising, but it was not. So yeah, this book was just a weird reading experience. I felt like I would be reading a young adult book and then we would get like a spicy scene in the current day and I'd be like, what's happening? And also just like the big twist as to why they aren't friends is so obvious, and I don't know, it just wasn't my favorite. Like I said, the writing was good, liked the lake house vibes. I believe this author is coming out with another book next year, also set at a lake house, and I am interested in reading it because I did like the writing and everything in this book. I just hope that the plot and the characters and the tone of it is a bit better. Okay, the next book that I wanted to mention as a disappointing read is Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa. This is I read this book a long time ago. I don't even know how to describe it. So we're following Yumiko, who has been raised in this temple and raised to kind of be able to protect and preserve this very special like scroll. It's a very ancient scroll that one day when the temple kind of burns down and she's the only one really left from that temple, she has to take and run away and flee with it and protect it. And then Yumiko runs into this man named Tatsumi who is trying to retrieve the scroll for himself. He has his own motivations for having this scroll, and the two of them end up like traveling together, and they make this like alliance because Yumiko is like saying that she's going to bring him to the scroll even though she has it the whole time. So that's kind of what I remember based off of like what I read from the description. So yeah, clearly the first point is that this book was just not memorable. I have completely forgotten almost everything about this book. But I had heard really good things about this book. It was a book that I had heard people talk about for a few years now, and I know this author has a lot of other books that people really enjoy. And then the series was like specifically recommended to me, and so I wanted to give it a try, but I just didn't love it. It just didn't work for me. Here I go saying it didn't work for me again. Again, didn't really connect with the characters. Thought also that the pacing was very strange with this book. I remember there being like a lot of side quests, and some of them would like end up being there for a reason, but there were so many side quests and things that these characters would get sucked into doing on their way to getting to where they were trying to get to, and a lot of them felt like they were just like filler to fill up some of the time and space in this book. Some of these side quests just felt very inconsequential and like didn't really matter, so I don't know, it just got kind of annoying and repetitive to read so many side quests that didn't end up meaning anything. But as we can see, I don't really remember a whole lot about this book, so that's all I can really remember about what I didn't like about it. Okay, I also kind of don't want to talk about this next one. This one also might upset some people, but my next disappointing read is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I know, I'm sorry. So this is a very popular like enemies to lovers romance book. We're following Lucy and Josh, and they work in the same office. I don't remember what their job is. I don't know if we actually know. Do we know? We probably do. I don't remember. I read this earlier on in the year. Again, memory, pea brain. I don't remember. But the two of them work together. They're also like have the same office. I think they share an office. Their desks are like right next to each other, and they just do not get along. And then if I'm remembering correctly, I believe that they're up for the same promotion, so they kind of have to go head to head and like compete against each other to try and get this job. And this was an interesting book because the first bit of this book, I was just like, it just was fine. I wasn't super into it. I remember thinking the kind of enemies, rivals part was a little cheesy, like her password on her laptop or computer at their office is like, I hate Joshua forever or something. Like, you are an adult woman. I just found it a bit cringe and cheesy at points. And then eventually I remember there being a specific trope in this book that I really love, the like nursing back to health trope. That did happen, and that's when I was finally like, okay, maybe I'm on board with this romance. I was never super into it. I was never super invested, but towards the middle I was like, okay, I can get behind this a bit. I understand why people like this. And then the ending is when it came all crashing down. This went from being cringy too creepy. You find out a specific thing that Josh has done because he has these feelings for Lucy. I believe it's supposed to be like a romantic reveal. I find it very alarming. If I was in the man's home and this happened, I'd be like, haha, that's nice. And then I would run and leave and never see him again. And I know it's a romance, like, there's things in romance books that you read and you wouldn't necessarily want them to happen to you, but you can read about it and it's fun, whatever. But this was just creepy. And then not only that, but there was also like the random use of the R word in this book. Why? I don't know. It did not need to be used. And this book was published in 2016. We knew not to use this word in 2016. And it just really took me out of the story. It really was very jarring to hear that randomly thrown in. And it just completely made me feel so uncomfortable with the ending. There was a lot of things clearly that happened at the end that I was uncomfortable with, but it just made any sort of enjoyment and any investment, if I had any really at all, like a little bit in the romance, it just completely took any of that away, and I just really didn't love it. Okay, so my next disappointing read is going to be Once Upon a K-Prom by Kat Cho. This is a YA contemporary where you're following Elena, who had this childhood best friend named Robbie. He ends up leaving to go train to be a like K-pop idol. He leaves, but he promises before he leaves to come back to take her to prom. And then years later, the year of her prom, Robbie comes back, knocks on her door, and asks her to prom. And he is now in this very like popular K-pop group. So it's just the two of them kind of coming back together as friends and trying to be convinced to go to prom with him, while also dealing with the fact that her old best friend is now super famous and maybe the trials and issues that come with that. So I was really excited about this book because I enjoy K-pop, I enjoy certain groups, and I also have read a book from Kat Cho before. I read Wicked Fox and really enjoyed it. So I was like, oh, an author I already enjoy plus K-pop, this will be great. and it just was disappointing. I just didn't really love it the way I was hoping to. I will say I do take some responsibility for not enjoying this book simply because I think this is a YA book, definitely geared towards a younger audience, and that is not me. So I respect that and understand that, and I think that that is why, or a part of the reason why I didn't enjoy it. It did read very young, which I think I wasn't expecting because I'd read Kat Cho's like fantasy, YA fantasy, and it didn't read young, so I think my expectations were also just very different. But this book was just kind of giving me like 2012 Wattpad fan fiction vibes. The fact that Elena was like best friends with this guy that's in this popular K-pop group, this popular famous person. She's friends with the band and gets to hang out with them backstage, and she's not like the other girls because she's not a fan of them, and she just gets to hang out with them. Like, it's just so like, I don't know, it just reminds me of like fan fictions from 2011. Also, she did have like not like the other girls' energy just simply because she didn't love this band and was obsessed with them and found them all attractive. At some point, I think she kind of, the way she presented it was that she was above the people who were like obsessed with them and would like fangirl over them. This book also definitely had some like repetitive moments. I think Kat Cho really wanted this book to resemble like a K-drama, have those kind of K-drama vibes. And I can tell that she wanted it because she told us like 50 times throughout this book that it reminded her of a K-drama. Like, she would have, Elena, the main character, would have this inner monologue where something like romantic or silly would happen, very like K-drama-esque, and would have the thought, this reminds me of a K-drama, all the time. Everything that happened. So it just felt a bit forced. Like, there are ways to naturally remind the readers of K-dramas and want that to be your inspiration without continuously reminding us that you want us to think of a K-drama when reading it. And then there were a couple of times where she would like bring up Robbie, the K-pop idol's like mental health, but the way it was discussed, it just didn't really like dive deep enough to be really like significant and meaningful. I don't know. It was just like weird the way it was kind of discussed. I don't know. I think the biggest thing for me was that this just felt like BTS fanfiction, and I would have ate this book up when I was younger. The One Direction stan in me would have been obsessed with this because this was the fanfiction that I was reading when I was 12 years old. So I definitely would have enjoyed this as a young adult reader. I think just at this point, it just was a bit too young for me, but overall just didn't love the writing style, which is interesting because I've read from Kat Cho before, which I think is why this was disappointing. I wasn't expecting such a big shift, but didn't love the writing style. It was very repetitive at points, and just found it a bit cheesy. Didn't love the not like the other girls kind of vibe that the main character had, but also this just wasn't targeted towards me, so I still would recommend it. Just wasn't for me. The next book I want to talk about is finally a book that I actually own, is Gleanings by Neal Shusterman. So this is a short story collection set in the Arc of a Scythe world. So the Scythe trilogy by Neal Shusterman is a series that I really, really loved. I was obsessed with the first two books when I read them a few years ago now. It was probably like 2018, I think, when I read the first two. The third one I definitely found disappointing, but still liked it. But I was still excited enough about this short story collection. This world is so fascinating. In this world, there's basically a cure for any illness, any sort of death. People can't really die. There are ways, but it's very difficult to actually die in this world. So to control the kind of population, there are these people called Scythes who go around and take care of the population. So the short story collection is just kind of seeing different areas of this world, seeing different parts, seeing different sides who we maybe didn't see in the original series. I did find some parts of it interesting. I did find it interesting to see different parts of this world that we didn't see in the original books. But there were so many short stories where I just didn't care. There were a lot of short stories where we were seeing characters and people we just had no connection to from the main series, which in some short stories it worked, but it was like a majority of the short stories where we saw people we didn't recognize, and for me that just made me not really care. There were also a few short stories in here that were just a little strange, a little weird. I'd get to the end of them and be like, okay, I don't know why that was in here, but let's just keep moving on. I don't think I'm a short story gal. Even when it comes to series that I love and they're short stories set in worlds that I love, I sometimes still struggle with them. So just found this a little bit disappointing, not super invested in a lot of the short stories. There were some good ones. I still think if you're a fan of the series, you could pick this up and really enjoy it. I think it's just a personal thing of me not being the biggest short story collection girly, and there still were some good ones, but a lot that just didn't really work for me. Here we go again. Oh, ignore that. I was taking Bookstagram pictures while I was waiting for my camera to charge so I could continue filming, and I don't feel like getting up to remove that. So ignore the scarf that's now in the background of this video. So the next book I wanted to mention, another disappointing read, was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. So this is a mystery thriller novel, also set in kind of dual timelines. We're following this group of friends who went to college together and were really close. And one of their friends ended up getting murdered at school. So there was someone that was potentially the person who was behind it, but no one was ever really sure. So these friends kind of just moved on with their lives, not knowing who actually killed their friend. Some years later, they go to a reunion for their college, and when they get there, they get confronted by someone, and they are saying that someone in this group of friends was responsible for killing their friend. And they're gonna figure out who it is by the end of this reunion. So it has this really fun premise, and I think actually the author did a really good job of using the dual timelines. I feel like we got pieces from the past at perfect points. We never learned anything too early or too late. It was just like so well paced and so well done, the kind of dual timelines, the information we were getting in each timeline. I remember being equally invested somewhat in enjoying both timelines. I think the biggest reason why this book was disappointing for me was because of the hype. I kind of fell into the hype for this. There were so many people posting about this book and so many people were loving it, and I wanted to be one. And I didn't necessarily hate this book. Like I said, I thought the dual timeline and the pacing was done well, and the characters are all kind of awful, but it kind of adds to the drama, so it's like kind of entertaining even though they're all awful. I think I just had such high expectations of this book, especially as someone who doesn't read a whole lot of thrillers and mysteries. I went into this book expecting to have my mind be blown because so many people were loving it, and that was just not the case. Super early on into this book, I think it was like maybe 20% of the way through this book, I had figured out who was the person that was responsible for what had happened to their friend. Like, once we kind of met a lot of the main characters from this book, saw a lot of the people who were going to be involved, I had a prediction on who it was within the first like 20% of this book, and I was right. And I don't read a lot of mysteries and thrillers, so for me to have certain tropes and certain personalities already in my head and be like, it's gonna be this person because it just made sense, and it was, I just feel like I shouldn't be able to figure that out. And not to say that if you guess a reveal or a plot twist in a thriller or mystery that that's going to completely ruin the book, because I did somewhat enjoy the journey getting there, but I do wish that I had been more surprised. I think it would have had more of an impact on me if I was surprised by the different twists in this book, because there definitely were a few reveals and a few twists and turns, and I feel like there was only really one that I was like actually surprised with, and it was like kind of a smaller reveal. So I don't know, I thought this book was like somewhat entertaining, and I think if I had been surprised by a lot of the twists and turns, it would have been a book that I would have loved, but because I kind of just predicted exactly how it was gonna go, it wasn't as entertaining as it could have been. And I do think part of it too was that I just fell into the hype for this one, which was silly of me because I don't have the most success with thrillers and mysteries, so I shouldn't have, but I did. I just didn't absolutely love it the way so many other people did. My next disappointing read is The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. So yet another thriller, and I just think that thrillers and mysteries are not for me. So this book, you're following this girl whose name I forget. She goes to Paris to stay with her brother. She's kind of running from something from her past, but she goes to stay with her brother in his apartment in Paris, and when she gets there, he's not there. And there's just some suspicious things about it that makes her think that something has happened to him. So she starts to kind of get some help from people who live in the apartment, but there's also some weird people in the apartment. There's just kind of a weird vibe going on, and I found this book a little underwhelming. I do think some of the plot twists and some of the twists and turns were good, but I just found a big majority of this book to be very underwhelming and very boring, and there were so many things that were in this book that just didn't end up amounting to anything, were just not important. And I understand the use of like red herrings or wanting, readers to maybe think something's important, but it's not, and you're kind of led astray. I understand that. I understand that that's a thing that happens. But there were just so many things in this book that were just so unimportant that it was like, why even was it in here at all? There were also so many characters in this book. It was hard to keep track of who was who, and that made it a little bit more difficult for me to get invested and be excited to figure out what was going on because I didn't really know who anyone was. There were just so many characters. And also the main character in this book was not the smartest. And I understand a main character in a thriller or a mystery making some dumb decisions here and there to kind of forward the plot and maybe find some other reveals out or whatever. I understand why there may not be the most, not not that they're not intelligent, but maybe they make some dumb decisions along the way. I understand that. But this character, this main character, there were a lot of decisions that's like, I feel like literally everyone would not make those mistakes. Like, she's trying to locate her brother, right? She has a bit of evidence about what might have happened. And she just meets this guy, barely knows him. He asks if he can hold on to this evidence, and she's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Wouldn't you want to hold on to that? I don't know. Why are you so trusting? Especially of someone you just met that's near the place where your brother disappeared. Like, it's just so bizarre to me. So yeah, there were just some like frustrating moments to read about, but it was also just like kind of boring and underwhelming throughout the whole book. Like I said, there were some good reveals and plot twists, but this is an instance where the book needed more than just the plot twists. Okay, we have 2 more books in this disappointing category. Then we're going to get into the worst books, the books I just really did not like this year. So the second to last disappointing read I want to mention is You've Reached Sam by Dustin Tao. So this book is about this girl whose boyfriend sadly passes away. She's in high school, so she's very young. They were very young. She is really struggling, obviously. She's really grieving the loss of him, and she decides to call his phone one last time, hear his voicemail, hear his voice one last time, but then when she gives him a call, he answers. There's this kind of like last chance to kind of communicate with him and help her through that process of grieving and losing him. But this book got a lot of hype because so many people were reading it and sobbing. And if you don't know, I am a crier. I cry very easily. I'm very emotional. I'm very sensitive. And for some reason, seeing people absolutely lose it and sob over a book makes me want to read it even more. So I read it expecting to have this very intense emotional reaction to this book. I don't think I shed a tear reading this book, and that I think is where my biggest problem comes from. And okay, I first want to say, I'm not trying to, one, take away from the author and this author's like inspiration and motivation for writing this book. I don't know anything about this author and why he chose to write this book, if there's an emotional or like personal reason why he wrote it, and I'm not trying to take away from that. I'm also, two, not trying to take away from anyone who did relate to this book or could take something from it, felt emotionally impacted by it. I think books about grief and loss are very personal, and people are going to react to books that talk about these subjects differently. But because this book was talking so heavily about grief and loss and losing this young boy who was really like 18 years old, they had a whole future ahead of them, it just didn't make me emotional. I felt no connection to it. This book starts off with him having already passed, so we kind of get to know this boyfriend who had passed through the phone calls and like flashbacks, but it just didn't make me feel anything because I really had no connection to this character prior to this. I think that's one of the biggest things, is that this is the type of story where you really want to connect with the characters so you feel what they're feeling, and that's how you get affected by it. And I just did not connect with any of them. Not that I can't relate to what they were experiencing, it was more so just the way that these characters were written. I just couldn't connect with them. And again, not trying to take away from the author and what he was trying to do here, but this was a book that just kind of, to me, the way that it read to me was, I'm not saying that this is why he wrote it, but it just felt it was sad for the sake of being sad. I don't know, there was like some depth, I guess, missing from it for me. It just felt very like, this is a sad story about this sad thing that happened and you're gonna feel sad. But I didn't feel connected. I didn't feel invested enough to actually feel those emotions. Like, I could recognize that this was a very sad story, but the investment in the characters and the story itself just wasn't there for me. It felt a little surface level, which made it hard for me to get invested enough to feel those sad emotions. Also, like, another kind of nitpicky thing was I didn't love the writing. I feel like there were some times where there would be like a flashback, but it was just like weirdly woven into the story that it was like I couldn't really tell if it was a flashback or not. Like, it was just kind of confusing, and the writing style was just not my favorite. Again, an important story, and I think there's going to be so many people who do connect with this, and I think that's so important. It just didn't really work for me, didn't feel invested in it, and just didn't make me as sad as I was expecting to be. Okay, so my final disappointing read of 2022, my most disappointing read of the year, was A Psalm of Storms and Silence by Roseanne Brown. This was my first read of 2022. So we weren't off to a good start. And I don't think I gave this book a bad rating. I think I gave it like 3 or 3.5 stars. It definitely wasn't bad. I just was expecting it to be a 4.5, 5-star like I gave the first book in this duology. So this is the sequel to A Song of Race and Ruin, and in that book you're following Malik and Karina, and I feel like this is the type of story you don't want to know too much before going into it. You don't want to know too much of the plot, but the two of them both want specific things. Malik wants to find his sister who's been taken, and then we're also following Karina, who is trying to find a husband, trying to find a king for a specific reason. And the two of them, their lives kind of get intertwined, and Malik ends up participating in this competition to become the potential husband of Karina. But there's a lot more to it than that, so it's just a fun ride. The first one, I absolutely loved it. I loved the kind of enemies to lovers, but not really. They didn't really know that they were enemies, but like they were. And I don't know. I loved the whole setting. I loved the magic system. I loved like the folklore that was involved. I loved the characters. I loved Karina and I loved Malik so much. So I was so excited going into the sequel to see how their story wrapped up. And then it just wasn't what I was hoping. I think the biggest thing for me with this book is that this book, it felt like it had a lot of filler. There was just a big chunk in the middle of this book where not a lot was happening, or it was just boring, or it was repetitive, and characters were acting out of character, and it just kind of felt like the author was trying to fill in some space before getting to the ending of this book. The very beginning of this book was good. The ending of this book was good. Like, I did find the way this story wrapped up to be satisfying. So yeah, they just felt like there were a lot of filler chapters in this book, especially in Malik's perspective. He also was the character that I feel like was acting kind of differently to how he acted in the first book, but in his chapters, I feel like they were very repetitive and there was not a whole lot going on. It was almost as if the author had more ideas for Karina's chapters and her story versus Malik's, but was still trying to make their chapters and perspectives equal, even though there was less going on with Malik. So yeah, it was just a weird reading experience. I didn't expect to be bored reading this book, but I was, and I was so disappointed when I was reading this and not enjoying it. I didn't give this a bad rating. I gave it, I think, 3.5 stars, but I was expecting it to be a 5-star and was expecting to love it. So when I didn't, it was just really disappointing. And again, I started the year with this book, so that was also very disappointing to start 2022 off with a book that I was so excited about and didn't end up loving. So I still think the duology as a whole is good. I just think this book compared to the first book was just not quite as good for me. Now we're in the kind of worst books of the year section. So I think I have 5 books to talk about. The first book that I just really did not like at all this year was A Dark and Shallow Lies by Jenny Meyer Sane. But this is a book where you're following this main character whose name I forget, and she used to live in this town until her mom passed. And in this specific town, she had a group of friends that she was really close with. And also in this town, there are a lot of psychics. This town is known for having a lot of psychics. When her mom passes, she ends up moving to live with her dad. And while she's living with her dad, one of her very close friends ends up going missing. And then months later, I think it's during the summer, she returns back to this town to visit with her old family and friends. And they still have not figured out what happened to her friend who went missing. And she's very confused as to how there's been nothing, no leads. They have no idea where she may have ended up. And also in a town that's full of psychics, no one's been able to kind of sense anything about it. So this whole book, you're just seeing this main character really struggle to figure out what may have happened to her best friend, while also maybe perhaps having her own psychic abilities. It was just not good. 80% of this book, nothing was happening. You get the setup to the story, you get the setup to the friend disappearing, and maybe this main character having some psychic abilities, and maybe that will help her find her friend, yada yada. Then the rest of the book happens. And then like the last hour of I think I was listening to the audiobooks, the last hour of the book, finally things started happening, the reveal started happening, you started getting information. But the majority of the book, nothing was happening. So I was super bored. This was a book that if not filming and reading this book for a video, I would have DNF'd. I just did not care at all. I was not invested. I was so bored reading this book. I also feel like there were so many things in this book that could have made it good. The author included in the book and just did not utilize at all. The fact that this is a psychic town, you don't really see anything to do with that. That really doesn't play as big of a role in this book and in this story as I would have thought. Also, the main character has a big group of friends, and I feel like if you have this mystery as to what may have happened to your friend, I feel like a big cast of characters might be beneficial, because then you can kind of lead people down a bunch of different paths. Didn't know where it was going to go if you had used these group of friends. I could not tell you the difference between any of them. I could only really remember 4 of the characters in this book because they were the only ones that were really mentioned at all. So it was just kind of obvious where the book was going when there was such a small group of people involved. The twists and turns were also very obvious because, again, small cast of characters. There weren't that many options. But the author also very clearly was trying to persuade the reader to believe one thing and maybe believe one person was behind it and kind of make this other person look innocent, and it couldn't be them. No, never them. Obviously, we know where it goes. It just felt so forced, the way that they were trying to make us believe a certain thing or a certain person was involved, and to be completely surprised by another person being involved when it was so obvious from the start that that was going to be how it worked out. There was also another part of one of the reveals that I had predicted. I had like briefly thought about this and was like, maybe that happened and that's why this whole book and the whole mystery has occurred. And I was like, no, that can't be right. That can't be what happened. But I was right. And it's a head scratcher. A head scratcher? Is that a saying? I don't know. It's a thinker. It was a choice, we'll say that. Just very like underwhelming, so boring, so predictable. Like there just was no like payoff to listening to this very boring like 10-hour long audiobook to get reveals that were super obvious from the very first hour. So just not great. Didn't love it. Another book that I just really did not like this year was 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. So this is another mystery thriller. When will I learn? We don't know. But this book, you're following these 9 characters who all get a list in the mail with just their names on it. That's it. It's just the 9 names over and over again. They all get it and they don't understand why or the purpose. So they all just kind of ignore it until people from the list start showing up dead. This book, you're kind of trying to piece together who might be behind this list, who might be behind trying to take all these people out, the connection between all of them, why they were chosen, why they're being targeted. It was just very underwhelming yet again. You would think with characters having their names on this list, having the people who are on this list show up dead, you would think that they would maybe start to be a little concerned. No, this book was just following all of these characters as they go about their day-to-day lives, completely ignoring the list and completely ignoring what's going on, and it's just boring because you're just following these characters in their day-to-day lives. I don't care about that. I want to see the mystery. I want to know what's behind it. I want them investigating it. I want them to be concerned. No. You don't get that. You just get the everyday things of their lives and them just like not caring and then being surprised when something happens. Like, I don't know. It was just very boring to follow. Also, there were a lot of characters. Like I said, there were 9 characters in this story that you're kind of following and getting the perspectives of. None of the characters were really distinct enough. I had to make a list on my phone of all of the characters' names, kind of their ages, what they did, like their occupation, where they lived, so that when we would get into a chapter, I would know who we were following. Because if I didn't do that, all of these characters would have just blended together. All of them seemed so similar. None of them really had distinct personality traits. Another one, I probably should have just DNF'd it or like scrolled to the end of the book, because I think I also listened to this on audio and just like listen to the end and see who it was and what happened. It was not worth getting through that whole book just to get to that ending. Also, this book is very clearly a kind of almost retelling of And Then There Were None. And that's another thing. It gets mentioned like 50,000 times throughout this book that it's And Then There Were None. Like, And Then There Were None gets mentioned. One of the characters is reading And Then There Were None. They used to read And Then There Were None when they were a kid. It just gets mentioned so often. It's so on the nose that the author wanted us to think of And Then There Were None while reading this book. And that was another thing, is the reveal was also underwhelming and predictable, because when the talking about And Then There Were None, they talked about like certain reveals in that, or like just like having a conversation about like the ending of that book or just the ending of certain like mysteries and stuff, and saying certain things about that that made the reader go, oh, well, that connects to this person, so it must be this person. And then it was. So it was so obvious. Like, the author was literally telling you who was responsible. So then by the end of the book, you already know. So you go through this whole boring book, and then you already knew who it was. So it's just, it was boring and underwhelming, and I didn't like it. Another book that I really did not like this year was Olive by Emma Gannon. So this is following Olive, who has this group of friends that were really close in college. They became friends in college. The opening of this book is them leaving their college apartment, the apartment that they all shared, and starting to go off into their own lives and realizing that that moment is never going to be the same. And Olive really struggles with that, especially years later when all of her friends have started their own futures, their own families, and they all have kids. They either have kids, are pregnant or really desperately want to have children. There's a character that really wants kids and is really struggling to get pregnant. So if that's something that could potentially upset you, I just want to let you know that that is a part of this book. And Olive as a character doesn't want kids. She does not want to get pregnant and have children. She doesn't understand it. And she just wants her friendships with these girls to be the same as it was when they were in college. She doesn't understand why things just can't be the same as they always were. So this book does have a big discussion on being child-free by choice and really struggling with being with her current partner and him wanting to have kids, him knowing that she didn't want kids but hoping that she would have changed her mind, and dealing with her friends who are all in different stages of motherhood or trying to become mothers and her just not relating to that. This is another one where if you could relate to this book because you want to be child-free by choice, or if there's any aspect of this book that you personally could relate to, I don't want to dismiss that. I do think it's an interesting topic to discuss because there's so many people who don't want to have kids, and that's okay. I understand that that's an important discussion to have. However, Olive is probably one of the worst characters I've ever read about, and her friends aren't much better. Olive gets so frustrated throughout this whole book, feeling like she's being judged for not wanting kids, feeling like her friends just can't understand why she doesn't want kids, feeling just like judged by the people she meets on the street, asking if she has kids. She even lies to someone at one point saying she does. Like, she just feels very judged for that. But she, as a character, judges other people for wanting kids and judges her friends constantly for having or wanting different things in their life, having different goals, wanting kids. So it's like she gets mad when people judge her, but then she turns around and does it like times 10 to everyone else in her life. She does not treat her friends well. Her friends don't treat her very well either. I don't understand why these girls are friends. They don't like each other. They don't treat each other well. I feel like there was a whole conversation at one point between Olive and the friend. I don't remember. All of the friends honestly like seemed so similar. They all have very similar like personalities. One of the friends that was struggling with getting pregnant and was really struggling to have kids, there was just this very insensitive discussion between the two of them, and it just was really uncomfortable to read. You get to the end of the book and Olive and her friends are all sitting around at like this restaurant getting lunch together, and they all go around the table and like apologize to each other for how crap friends they've been, and they all like each of the other friends like have like one thing to kind of apologize for, and then it gets to Olive and she's like, I'm sorry I did this. Like, it's an endless list because she's just not a good friend. She treated her friends like crap and then would get so upset when they would do the same to her and give her that same energy. It was such a frustrating thing to read about. Having this child-free by choice discussion is so important, like I said, and having to discuss like not needing to have that fulfillment just from having children. You can get that fulfillment in life from other things. However, you get to the end of this book, and without getting into too many spoilers, I just feel like that whole conversation gets flipped upside down. It gets completely just like done backwards, like where Olive is at the end of this book. It just doesn't make sense. It still kind of feels like, oh, but actually the only fulfillment in life are with kids. Like, it felt so backwards. I'll get into spoilers in case anyone is curious, but I'll put spoiler warning up on the screen so you know when to click off. I'll also put a timestamp in the description. But spoilers for the ending, Olive meets this new guy because her and her boyfriend broke up because he wanted kids, she didn't. She meets this new guy and starts seeing this new guy who already has two daughters. I think they're both like teenagers. He already has these daughters. His wife has passed, so he is single, and she ends up like getting with him, and at the end, that scene at the restaurant, she ends up having to leave because one of his daughters is in trouble and is needing help, and she becomes like this like mother-like figure for them. So it's almost like you get to the end of the book and there's this whole discussion about how you don't need children to be fulfilled, and then we get to the end of the book and she ends up almost having children. She didn't get pregnant and give birth herself, but that we all know that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way you can be a parent to somebody. So it's just like you get through this whole book and she still ends up having kids almost at the end. And so this whole message about like being child free, not needing to have kids to be fulfilled, how empowering. Then you get to the end and she kind of has kids. I just feel bad for the people who read this book hoping to get a sense of like comfort in the fact of like another person having these feelings, not wanting to have children, and then getting to the end and seeing like, oh, but actually the only way to be fulfilled is to actually have children. Like, it's just, it doesn't make sense with the message of this book. I just didn't like it. Another thing, I just didn't really like the writing like at all. I found it very weird. I also feel like there were a lot of plot holes and just weird things. Like Olive at one point goes to an appointment or something at like 8 a.m. and she comes out and she's like on the phone with one of her friends and they encourage her to like go have a drink, go have a martini or something. And it's like, it's 8 a.m. It honestly just felt like the author forgot that she wrote this appointment so early in the morning. Like there were so many weird things that just didn't make sense like that. I mean, if you want a martini at 8 a.m., I go for it. But it just felt like it wasn't so much like a active choice. It was more of a, did the author just forget that they wrote it this way? Yeah, unfortunately, I really did not like this. I found it very frustrating. All the characters were kind of awful, and the ending was just, I felt like the message of this book just got completely flipped backwards by the ending. So yeah, didn't love this. Okay, the last two books are the only books that I gave 1 star this year. So the sassiness might just get even worse. So I apologize in advance. All right, so the next book I want to talk about, my runner-up to the worst book of the year. That's not a fun thing to count down to, but anyway, it's The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. I read this for a vlog again earlier this year. I read this for my historical romance reading vlog, reading historical romance for the first time. So this is a historical romance, a Regency romance. We're following Daphne Bridgerton, who is trying to find a match, make a match, find a husband, and is really struggling to gain the attention of anyone. And then we're also following Simon, who has just returned to the Tun, and he does not want to get married. He does not want that, and a bunch of women want him to start to court them. So Simon and Daphne end up making this deal where they will enter this kind of fake courtship, and for her, the benefit will be that she will make other people jealous. She will start to be seen as desirable by the other men there, and hopefully will start getting some offers for marriage. And for Simon, it will keep the other women from trying to get with him and trying to make a match with him. So it does sound fun, like a fun premise, a historical romance with like fake courtship, fake dating kind of vibes. I love fake dating, so I was excited to see that that was a part of this book, because even though this series is very popular, I didn't know that that was like the premise of this. So I wish the fake dating, fake courtship aspect of this book lasted a bit longer, because that was the part of it that I really did enjoy. And the first half, I just kind of thought this book was fine. I wasn't super invested in the characters and the relationship, but I thought it was fine. I thought it was kind of fun having this fake courtship vibe. But then the second half is when things really take a turn, and I feel like it's something that is pretty well known, the issue of kind of consent at one point in this book. There is a very, very uncomfortable scene to read in this book. I just, at that point, really couldn't get behind this book. It was so uncomfortable to read, and it also like was so uncomfortable to read the ramifications of that, because it was almost like we were supposed to sympathize for the person that forced themselves onto the other, and that the other person was the villain, and sorry, no. Don't like it. It was just really like uncomfortable and really gross to read, and just like seeing the kind of explanation and the justification of why this character did that. It just, I don't know, like I understand feeling a bit betrayed by the other person by holding back information. They both were taking advantage of each other, but there's quite a big difference by what one character did to the other, and it was just super uncomfortable and was not super romantic. Didn't really support them as a couple or individuals after that. So it's kind of hard to read a romance where you're not really rooting for the couple. So didn't love that. It really just completely switched how I was feeling about this book. The little bit of enjoyment that I had for it just completely went out the window. So yeah, I'll have the vlog where I read this book linked below in case you want to hear more like in-depth thoughts. But like in conclusion, bottom line, this book just made me so uncomfortable. That scene with that issue of consent and how we're supposed to root for the couple and root for this romance after that. No. And that's like the whole point of a romance. You want to root for the couple. You want to root for them. And I couldn't. So I just really did not like this at all and found it so uncomfortable and disappointing. Okay, we have made it to the final book, my worst book of the year, and I feel like it's not going to come as a surprise to anyone. That is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I don't say this about books very often. As you may have been able to tell throughout this whole book, I've been saying this book didn't work for me, or I didn't like this book. I really didn't like this book. I haven't said I hate this book about anything, but I hate this book. So from what I remember about this book and from what I remember about the plot is we're following Poppy, who is the maiden, which is this significant person within this world. She's supposed to be very pure. I don't know. She represents like purity and blah, blah, blah. She gets this bodyguard named Hawk, and she starts to like fall for him and they start to, develop feelings, but she's supposed to be pure. There's that kind of tension between them. And then people start like rebelling against the kingdom and they're kind of getting involved. And honestly, this book is so popular. I feel like the general plot is kind of known, but I did not like this book. I hate this book, like I said, and I don't say that about many books. I did read this book for a book talk reading vlog. I read book talk recommendations, and I'll have that video linked below if you want to hear like all my in-depth, in real time reactions. But to start, the world building is one thing that I don't think was done well at all. I don't think people are necessarily reading this book for the world building. I think the romance is a big part of why people like this book, which we'll get into that in a moment. But I feel like with the world building, there were things that became like kind of significant to the plot and the characters. Those things I feel like were not explained. We were just kind of expected to understand them. There were parts of this world that were over-explained and that we got explanations for that had like no significance. So it felt like the important things that I should know the information about, I should understand to do with this world, I didn't. The writing just was not to my taste. I didn't enjoy the writing. I found it extremely repetitive. I feel like this book could have been cut down by half. The first half of this book was so unnecessarily long. There was an event that kind of kicked off like the second half of this book, and that should have happened so much earlier on, and there was so much that could have been cut out. Not only was the writing repetitive, but the amount of ellipses that were used in this book, it was not normal. Also, this book was pretty predictable. Not that I expected it to be like unpredictable, and I don't think this book was necessarily trying to be unpredictable, but there were so many things that this book hit within the plot that nothing that happened was surprising. There were some twists and turns that I saw coming from page 1, except Poppy did not see them coming because she is not a smart character, and you can't even get mad at me for saying that because she calls herself an imbecile like multiple times in this book, so she agrees. But there are times when characters are literally saying like right in front of her what is happening and who people are and just facts. Like things are literally being said right in front of her and she's like, but that doesn't make sense because that person can't do that. Like, girl, think about it for like 2 seconds and you'll be able to figure it out. Like, there were just so many twists and turns that relied on Poppy not being able to figure it out, but it was so obvious what was going on. So didn't love Poppy, didn't like Hawk, don't understand what's attractive about this man. He's like kind of awful. He's kind of an awful person. The like context behind the like spicy scenes between Poppy and Hawk were so uncomfortable. Again, there's like an issue of consent at certain parts of this book, and knowing what characters were going through when these spicy scenes happened, it just feels like certain characters were being taken advantage of. It just was so uncomfortable to read those scenes. And also, something else that was just really not good, there are 2 characters that are people of color within this book. Both of them are not only named after their like physical appearance, like for example, one of them, her name is Tawny, which Tawny is like a shade of brown. So super creative there. But not only that, they also are like servants or maids or like working for people who are in power or like have some sort of power over them. And it's just like so uncomfortable to read. I just don't understand how that happened and was written and was like, yeah, that's good. Like, it's just so bad. Everything about this book, just nothing. There was nothing that I liked, I don't think. The plot picks up in the second half, which was good, I guess, because it made it a little bit more enjoyable to read, but like, I didn't like the plot, I didn't like the characters, didn't like the romance, didn't like the racism. Like, there's just so many issues with this book, and I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, I'm not trying to say I don't understand why people like this. I know people have different tastes. There are books that I like that lots of people also hate. So I'm not trying to say that you're wrong for liking this if you like this book. I just really hated it. There was nothing about it that I liked. I'm still traumatized whenever I hear someone say honeydew. Why? Definitely my worst book of the year. Did not like this one at all, and I'm so sorry if you do. I'm not trying to roast your fave, but like I kind of am. But this is just my personal opinion. I just really hated this book. But that is it. Those are all of my worst and most disappointing reads of the year of 2022. It was quite an extensive list. I've been filming this video for hours. It's starting to get dark out. The lighting throughout this video is just going to continuously get worse. But this is definitely the year where I've had the most books, I think, to talk about in this type of video, in this worst books video. But of course, I have so many other books to talk about in my favorite books of the year video. So it's all about balance. There's plenty of books that I really did love this year, and I'm excited excited to film that video as well. But definitely let me know in the comments, maybe your worst book of the year, your least favorite book of the year, if you agree with any of the books I mentioned, or if you disagree. I know if you disagree, you're gonna let me know. Would love to have a conversation about any of these books down below, or any of your least favorite books of the year. But that is going to be it for this year's worst books of the year video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.